There is a photograph that sits in the Dawson County Courthouse in eastern Montana. It is black and white, creased down the middle and faded around the edges. In the photograph, a machine the size of a small house is pulling something enormous out of a ditch. The machine is belching black smoke. Its wheels are taller than the men standing beside it. And behind the controls, barely visible through the steam, sits an old man with white hair and hands like leather. Nobody in the courthouse remembers who put the photograph there. Nobody remembers when. But everybody in Dawson County knows the story behind it. And if you sit down at the counter at Bud's Diner on Route 200, someone will tell it to you. They will tell it slowly, the way people in Montana tell everything, because out here, time is not something you rush through. It is something you respect. This is that story. In the fall of 1987, the Montana Department of Transportation decided to widen a section of Highway 200 between Glendive and Circle. It was a routine project, the kind of thing that happened every few years as the state tried to keep its roads functional across a landscape that seemed determined to swallow them. The contract went to Riker and Sons, a heavy construction outfit out of Billings that had been building roads across Montana for 3 generations. Carl Riker, the grandson of the founder, ran the operation now. He was 38 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and possessed the kind of confidence that comes from inheriting a successful business and assuming you earned it. Carl drove a black pickup truck with the company logo on both doors. He wore steel-toed boots that had never seen real mud, and a hard hat that looked like it came out of the package that morning. Carl brought his crew to the Highway 200 job site on the first Monday of October. 18 men, 6 machines, and a timeline that said they would be finished by Thanksgiving. The state was paying $1.2 million for the project, and Carl intended to finish early and pocket the difference between his actual costs and the contract price. The first 3 weeks went smoothly. The crew graded the shoulders, laid new drainage pipe, and began widening the roadbed. The weather cooperated, cold but dry, the kind of Montana autumn that made you believe winter might never come. Then, on the 4th week, they hit the culvert. It was buried under the westbound lane about 6 miles east of Circle. An old concrete drainage culvert, maybe 4 feet in diameter, that carried runoff from the hills north of the highway to a dry creek bed on the south side. The culvert had been installed decades ago, probably in the 1940s, and nobody had thought about it since. But when the crew started excavating around it, they discovered a problem. The culvert had collapsed. Not partially, not in one section, but along its entire length. 30 feet of concrete pipe had crumbled into the earth, creating a void beneath the highway that had been slowly filling with mud and debris for years. The road surface above it had held, but barely. Another winter of freeze and thaw cycles would have opened a sinkhole big enough to swallow a truck. Carl Riker looked at the collapsed culvert and saw dollar signs disappearing. Replacing it meant excavating a trench 30 feet long and 8 feet deep, right through the middle of the highway. It meant closing the road. It meant delays. "We need to get the old pipe out first," his foreman said. A man named Gil Torrance, who had been building roads since before Carl was born. "Then we can lay the new culvert and backfill." "How long?" Gil looked at the trench, at the collapsed concrete, at the mud that had filled the void. "The concrete is broken up pretty good. We can get most of it out with the excavator. But there is a section in the middle, maybe 10 feet of it, that is still intact. Solid concrete, 4 feet across, buried in clay. That is going to be tough to extract." Carl had brought his best piece of equipment for this job, a Komatsu excavator, 2 years old, with a 40-foot reach and enough hydraulic power to rip a building apart. The machine weighed 90,000 pounds and had cost the company nearly $400,000. It was Carl's pride. "Use the Komatsu," Carl said. "That is what it is for." Gil Torrance looked at the excavator, then at the trench. The Komatsu is a digging machine, Carl. It is designed to scoop and lift. This job needs pulling force. We need to grab that pipe and drag it out horizontally. That is a different kind of work. It is a $400,000 machine, Carl said. It can handle a piece of old concrete. Gil did not argue. He climbed into the cab and went to work. The first attempt lasted about 20 minutes. Gil maneuvered the bucket around the intact section of culvert, got a grip on the concrete pipe, and engaged the hydraulics. The machine groaned. The arm shuddered. The tracks dug into the earth. The culvert did not move. It was encased in 40 years of compacted clay, frozen into the ground like a fossil embedded in rock. He tried approaching from a different angle. Same result. The concrete pipe was too heavy, too deeply embedded, and the excavator's design was working against it. Hydraulic excavators are built to dig downward and lift upward. They generate enormous force in those directions. But pulling horizontally, dragging something out of the ground sideways, that was not what they were engineered to do. Gil climbed down from the cab. "She will not budge it," Gil said. "We are fighting the machine's geometry." Carl's face went red. That is a 90,000-pound machine, making over 300 horsepower. You are telling me it cannot move a piece of concrete pipe? I am telling you, it is not the right tool for this job. Carl climbed into the cab himself and spent the next hour trying every approach he could think of. Nothing worked. By the end of the day, he had accomplished nothing except burning 80 gallons of diesel fuel and generating a hydraulic fluid leak in the main boom cylinder. Carl spent the next day on the phone. He rented a Caterpillar D7 bulldozer from an outfit in Miles City. It arrived on a flatbed 2 days later. The D7 was a serious machine, 50,000 pounds with a powerful drivetrain designed for pushing and pulling. Gil chained the bulldozer to the culvert section and started pulling. The D7's tracks spun. The chain went tight. The engine screamed. The culvert shifted about 2 inches, then stopped. The clay had a grip on that pipe that seemed almost personal, as if the earth itself had decided this particular piece of concrete was staying right where it was. They tried wetting the clay. They tried digging around the culvert to reduce the contact area. They tried pulling from different angles. 2 more days passed. The culvert moved a total of about 8 inches. Carl Reicher was losing his mind. He was also losing about $4,000 a day in equipment costs, crew wages, and contract penalties. That was Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, a green pickup truck pulled up to the barricade at the edge of the construction zone. The man who climbed out was not what Carl expected. His name was Edwin Hartley, and he was 76 years old. He stood about 5'8" and could not have weighed more than 150 pounds. His face was the color and texture of a walnut shell, carved by decades of Montana wind and sun. He wore canvas work pants, a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar, and a cap so old that whatever logo it once carried had been erased by time. Edwin Hartley had ranched 2,000 acres north of the highway for over 50 years. He had been watching the construction crew struggle for a week, driving past the barricade every morning on his way to check his cattle, watching the machines strain and fail. He walked up to the work site with the slow, deliberate stride of someone who knew exactly where he was going and was in no hurry to get there. Gil Torrance saw him first. "Morning, Edwin." "Gil." Edwin nodded toward the trench. "Saw you boys been wrestling with that old culvert." Gil smiled tiredly. 6 days now. She will not come out. I might have something that could help. Carl Reicher walked over, looking at Edwin the way a man in an expensive restaurant looks at someone who wandered in wearing overalls. "Site is closed," Carl said. Insurance liability. No visitors. I am not a visitor, Edwin said calmly. I am the man who owns every acre north of this highway for 3 miles. That water runs off my land through your culvert. I have got a stake in this. Carl? Edwin is good people, Gil said. Let him talk. Edwin looked at the trench. I have got a machine that can pull that out, he said. Carl laughed. The kind of laugh that is meant to make someone feel small. You have got a machine? What kind of machine? A Case steam traction engine. 1912 model. 110 horsepower. The laughter got louder. A steam tractor, Carl said. You want to pull out my culvert with a steam tractor? She has pulled harder things than concrete pipe out of harder ground than this, Edwin said. Your machines push and dig. Mine was built to pull. There is a difference, and right now, that difference is costing you about $4,000 a day. Carl's laughter faltered. The number was accurate. Edwin had calculated it himself. Gil Torrance looked at Carl. I have seen Edwin's steamer at the county fair. It is not a toy. It is 20 tons of iron and steel with drive wheels 6 feet tall. Carl shook his head. This is a professional construction site, not a county fair. We use real equipment here. Edwin did not react to the insult. Your real equipment has been sitting here for 6 days, he said. My antique has been pulling things out of the ground since before your grandfather was born. What is it going to cost you to let me try? 1 hour. If it does not work, you will never hear about it again. Carl looked at the culvert, at his idle machines, at his crew standing around. His pride was saying no. His bank account was screaming yes. Fine, Carl said. 1 hour. Go get your relic. Edwin drove north, toward his ranch, and did not come back for 3 hours. Carl assumed he had given up. He had not. He had been building steam. You cannot rush a steam engine. A gasoline engine starts with the turn of a key. A diesel engine starts with the push of a button. A steam engine starts with fire and water and time. You build the fire in the firebox. You fill the boiler with water. Then you wait. You wait for the water to heat, for the steam to build, for the pressure to rise to the level where the machine is ready to work. Edwin had learned from his father, Amos Hartley, who had bought the Case new in 1912 from a dealer in Miles City. Amos had used the engine for 20 years, pulling threshing machines across the prairie during harvest season, dragging equipment through mud and snow, doing the brutal work that horses could not handle. When Amos died in 1956, the steam engine passed to Edwin. By then, the age of steam was long over, but Edwin could not bring himself to scrap his father's machine. He kept it in a shed behind the main barn, maintained with the quiet devotion of a man preserving something precious. In 1978, Edwin had restored the engine completely. New gaskets, new packing, the boiler inspected and certified, every moving part cleaned and greased. He took it to county fairs and steam shows, let children climb on the massive wheels and feel the heat radiating from the boiler. But Edwin knew the machine was more than a showpiece. He had used it a dozen times over the years for real work, pulling stuck vehicles out of ditches, dragging fallen trees off ranch roads, once extracting a neighbor's combine that had sunk to its axles in a spring bog. The steam engine did not know it was supposed to be obsolete. It just pulled. Now, let me tell you about the arrival, because every person who was there that day remembers it differently, but they all remember the sound. It came first. Before anyone could see the machine, they heard it. A rhythmic, heavy breathing, like the heartbeat of something enormous and ancient. Chuff, chuff, chuff. The ground trembled slightly with each beat. Then a column of black smoke appeared above the hill north of the highway. rising straight up in the still October air, like a signal from another century. The steam engine crested the hill and started down toward the highway. It moved slowly, maybe 4 miles an hour, its massive wheels turning with the deliberate patience of a machine that had never been designed for speed. The boiler was black, freshly polished, reflecting the morning sun. The brass fittings gleamed, and on the platform, standing behind the controls with the ease of a man who had been doing this for 60 years, was Edwin Hartley. 5'8", 150 pounds, 76 years old, and completely in command of 20 tons of iron. Every man on the construction site stopped what he was doing to stare. The machine dwarfed the bulldozer. It made the excavator look refined and delicate by comparison. This was not a precision instrument. This was a blunt force object, a machine built in an era when the solution to any problem was more iron, more steel, more steam. Carl Reicher uncrossed his arms. "That thing is huge," he said. Gil Torrance was smiling for the first time in a week. 22 tons, Gil said. 6-foot drive wheels with steel cleats. She will grip anything. Edwin drove the steam engine to the edge of the trench and set the brake. He climbed down and began unloading chain from a rack on the back of the machine. Heavy chain, forged steel, with links as thick as a man's thumb. This chain had been in the Hartley family as long as the engine itself. "That chain will not hold," one of the crew members said. "This chain is rated for 50 tons, Edwin said, "and I am not going to jerk it. Your bulldozer was yanking, trying to break the culvert free all at once. I am going to pull steady and slow. Give the clay time to release its grip." Edwin walked into the trench with the chain over his shoulder. He was knee-deep in mud and clay, but he moved with the sureness of a man who had walked through worse. He wrapped the chain around the intact section of culvert, secured it with a heavy clevis pin, and climbed back out. Then he did something nobody expected. He stood at the edge of the trench for 10 minutes, just looking, studying the culvert, the angle of the trench, the position of his engine. Occasionally, he would kneel down and press his hand against the clay wall, feeling its consistency, its moisture content, its grip. "What is he doing?" Carl asked. "He is thinking," Gil said. Edwin walked back to the steam engine and made a small adjustment to the chain's angle. Then he climbed onto the platform, checked his pressure gauges, and put his hand on the throttle. "You might want to stand back," Edwin said. "If that chain breaks, it will cut a man in half." They moved back quickly. Edwin opened the throttle. The steam engine's voice changed. The idle chuffing became deeper, more purposeful. The pistons began to drive. The gears engaged with a sound like heavy doors closing. The drive wheels, 6 feet tall and studded with steel cleats, began to turn. They did not spin. They did not slip. Each cleat bit into the ground like a set of teeth, finding solid earth beneath the surface gravel, gripping with the authority of 22 tons pressing down from above. The chain rose from the ground and went taut. It hummed with tension, vibrating like a guitar string tuned too tight. In the trench, the culvert groaned. The clay around it cracked. Edwin watched the chain, watched the wheels, watched the pressure gauge. His hand on the throttle was steady. He was not forcing anything. He was applying pressure, constant, patient, inexorable pressure, the kind of pressure that breaks mountains over millennia, compressed into minutes. The culvert moved, not suddenly, not dramatically, but it moved. An inch, then another inch. The clay cracked and popped around it, releasing its grip in stages, like fingers being pried open one at a time. Edwin kept the throttle steady. The steam engine kept pulling. The chuffing grew louder, more rhythmic. Smoke poured from the stack. Steam hissed from the valves. The machine was working now, really working, doing what it had been built to do 75 years ago. The culvert slid forward. 6 inches, a foot, 2 feet. The clay was surrendering, its 40-year grip broken by a force it could not resist. Not a sudden, violent force, not a jerking, yanking force, but a slow, steady, relentless force that simply would not stop. Carl Reicher was standing with his mouth open. A machine from 1912 was doing what his $400,000 excavator and his rented bulldozer could not do. It was pulling 10 feet of solid concrete pipe out of frozen clay like it was sliding a drawer out of a dresser. The culvert came free with a sound like a cork being pulled from a bottle, a wet, sucking release that echoed across the Montana prairie. Edwin pulled it 30 feet clear of the trench, set the brake, and closed the throttle. Then he pulled the steam whistle. The sound split the morning air, a shriek of triumph that bounced off the hills and rolled across the grassland. It was the same sound that had echoed across these plains when Edwin's father was young, when steam was king and the prairie was being tamed by men and machines that did not know the meaning of impossible. The construction crew erupted. Men were cheering, clapping, shaking their heads in disbelief. Gil Torrance was grinning so wide it looked like his face might split. 6 days, he said. 6 days with modern equipment. And that old man just did it in 20 minutes. Carl Reicher did not cheer. He stood at the edge of the trench, staring at the culvert, at the steam engine, at the 76-year-old rancher calmly coiling his chain as if he had just finished an ordinary chore. Carl walked over to Edwin. "How?" Carl said quietly. "How did that thing do what my machines could not?" Edwin finished coiling his chain and hung it on the rack. "Your machines are built for speed and precision," Edwin said. "They are marvels of engineering. They can do things my steamer never could. But they have limits built into them. Computers that cut power when the load gets too high. Hydraulics that protect themselves from overload. That is smart engineering for most situations, but sometimes you do not need smart. You need stubborn." He patted the boiler. "This machine does not know when to quit. There is no computer telling it to back off. There is just steam and iron and the man behind the throttle. When I tell her to pull, she pulls. She will pull until something moves or something breaks. And I have been running her long enough to know the difference. What do I owe you?" Edwin looked at him. "You do not owe me anything. I did it because that culvert carries water off my land. But if you feel like you need to settle up, the Dawson County Historical Society could use a new roof on their equipment building. They have got 3 vintage machines in there that deserve better." Carl wrote a check for $5,000 that afternoon. He finished the Highway 200 project 3 days ahead of the revised schedule, because once the culvert was out, everything else fell into place. The story spread. In a county where the population barely topped 9,000, a story like this moved fast. By the end of the month, a reporter from the Billings Gazette drove out to do a story. Edwin did not like the attention, but he tolerated the reporter because the article mentioned the Historical Society, and donations came in after it was published. Carl Reicher drove out to Edwin's ranch a week after the project was finished. He found the old man in his barn, greasing the steam engine's wheel bearings. "I came to say something I should have said at the job site," Carl said. "I was wrong. I laughed at you and your machine. I treated you like you were wasting my time. And you saved my project." Edwin set down his rag. "You are not the first man to laugh at this engine, and you will not be the last. People see something old, and they assume it is you." "My father bought her in 1912, Edwin continued. "He was 24 years old. People told him steam was finished, that gasoline was the future. He said maybe so, but this machine will still be pulling when those gasoline tractors are rusting in a junkyard. Edwin looked at the engine. He was right. Every gasoline tractor on this ranch has been replaced 3 or 4 times. This engine has never been replaced. She has been repaired, restored, maintained, but never replaced. Because you cannot replace something that still does its job. Carl nodded slowly. I have been in construction for 15 years. Built my business on having the newest, biggest equipment. Always figured that was the edge. And most of the time, that is true, Edwin said. I am not going to tell you my steam engine is better than your excavator. For most jobs, it is not even close. But there are some jobs where the old ways still work, where patience beats power, where grip beats speed, where stubborn beats smart. The trick is knowing which jobs those are, and having the humility to admit when you have got the wrong tool. Carl left the ranch that afternoon with something he had not carried in a long time. Humility. He started keeping a photograph on his desk, a picture of Amos Hartley standing beside the Case steam engine in 1912, the year he bought it. A young man with his whole life ahead of him, standing next to a machine that would outlast him by generations. When people asked about the photograph, Carl told the story. He told all of it, including the parts that made him look foolish, because Carl Riker had learned something on that October day in Dawson County, something his expensive equipment and his business degree had never taught him. He learned that progress does not always move in a straight line, that newer is not always better, that the worst mistake a man can make is laughing at something he does not understand. Edwin Hartley kept ranching until 1994, when his knees and his back finally convinced him that 57 years was enough. He handed the operation to his son, Paul, who still runs cattle on those 2,000 acres north of Highway 200. The steam engine sits in the same barn where Amos Hartley parked it in 1912. Paul fires it up once a month. The same ritual his father performed, the same ritual his grandfather started. Edwin passed away in the spring of 2003, sitting in his kitchen, drinking coffee, looking out the window at the hills where he had spent his entire life. He was 91 years old. His funeral was held at the Methodist Church in Circle, and over 300 people came. Carl Riker was there. He had driven 4 hours from Billings. At the reception, Carl found Paul Hartley and shook his hand. "Your father changed the way I think about my work," Carl said. "He showed me that knowing how to use a machine is more important than knowing how to buy one." Paul smiled. "Dad would have liked that. He always said the most expensive tool in the shop is the one you do not know how to use." In 2015, Paul Hartley got a phone call from a construction foreman working on a bridge project south of Glendive. They had a concrete piling that would not come out. 2 excavators had failed. A crane could not get close enough. The foreman had heard the story about the culvert on Highway 200. "Is it really from 1912?" the foreman asked. "It really is. And it can pull out a concrete piling?" "My father pulled out a concrete culvert with it in 1987. My grandfather pulled stumps out of frozen ground with it in the 1930s. I pulled a water tank out of a sinkhole with it in 2008. If it is stuck in the ground, this engine can pull it out. How much do you charge?" Paul Hartley laughed, and in that moment, he sounded exactly like his father. "I do not charge. If it works, make a donation to the Dawson County Historical Society. They take care of the machines that people forgot about, the machines that still work when everything else fails." The piling came out in 35 minutes. The Case steam traction engine is still in the Hartley barn. 3 generations have maintained it, operated it, loved it. It has outlasted every other machine on that ranch. It has outlasted the horses that preceded it, and the tractors that were supposed to replace it. And every time someone drives past the Hartley Ranch on Highway 200, if they look north toward the hills, they can see the barn where it sits. waiting, patient, ready. Because somewhere out there, right now, someone is looking at a machine that will not move, a problem that modern equipment cannot solve, a situation that calls for something older and simpler and more stubborn than anything money can buy. And when they run out of options, when they have tried everything new and nothing has worked, they will hear about the Hartley engine. They will drive out to that ranch, and Paul Hartley will fire up the boiler, build the steam, and drive that ancient machine out of the barn and down the road, just like his father did, just like his grandfather did. The crew will watch it come. They will hear the chuffing first, then feel the ground tremble, then see the smoke rising above the hill. And some of them will laugh, because that is what people do when they see something they do not understand. But the engine will not care about the laughter. It never has. It will just pull. That is what it was built to do. And after 100 years, it has not forgotten.